We're letting everybody pile into our Zoom room and see us on Facebook. So we are going to get started in just a few seconds. I want to just give a moment for everyone to get in here so we can begin properly. So just bear with us for just a moment. Okay. Hey, everybody, this is Jeff Martin from Magic City Books. I'm so thrilled to have you back here for our virtual author series. We've been doing 2 or 3 of these a week since April, and we're going to continue doing them for a while. I think it's reasonable to think we won't be doing any in-person events for a while still, so we want to keep this going. I refer to it often as kind of a mixtape. We want to bring you really kind of issues and serious topics and talk about things in our community, and then the next moment we want to escape and have a little fun and just get out of our own heads for a little bit. And if we can create some balance to that, it'll be a nice opportunity for all of us to stay connected with each other and stay connected with you, our readers. This has been a really tough year in a lot of ways, and you've probably seen the news where a lot of bookstores are struggling around the country. I'll say candidly, we've been really doing well here, and it's because of you guys supporting us and coming out and buying books and coming to events and doing all the things that you're doing to keep us not just surviving, but in many ways thriving, which is certainly not the norm in America right now. So thank you all for doing that. We're really grateful for all the support that you've given us. We've got a couple cool things coming up. I don't want to go through the full list. I'll just tell you to go on our website, Magic City Books, and see the full schedule. This Thursday, though, we're going to be talking with Yale professor Timothy Snyder, who wrote a wonderful book called On Tyranny, which has been a big book the last few years. And we're going to be kind of doing a little pre-election chat with that. And then next week on election day, of course, I hope you guys are already planning to vote early. This Thursday, the ballpark where the Drillers play is going to be open for early voting at the ballpark. So you can go out there all weekend long and vote safe outside and get your vote done early. But next Tuesday, we're going to be giving away free copies of the Constitution to everybody, first 50 people who come in, just to kind of do something for election day. So get out there and vote, and hope to, see you on Tuesday. We had a great opportunity to speak with John Grisham earlier this year. We were talking, it's hard to keep time in 2020, but it felt like 5 years ago, but it really was just earlier this spring when we were talking about Camino Winds. And we, I believe, touched briefly on the fact that there was a new book coming this fall, and got really excited to find out that it was a long-awaited sequel to John's debut book, A Time to Kill, which I'm sure all of you have read, if not many times. And it's called A Time for Mercy, and it's a follow-up to the wonderful character of Jake Brigance. And I'm really excited to talk with John about it. So John, welcome back virtually to Tulsa. We're thrilled to have you back to talk about the book. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Jeff, happy to be in Tulsa, and would love to do it one day and non-virtually. And
yes.
An old-fashioned signing, yeah.
We'll go to a ballpark, go to a game together someday over here. So congratulations on the book. I was thinking, A Time to Kill comes out, I guess, 31 years ago now. And the book is initially a pretty small print run. I think a few thousand copies. What was the initial print run for A Time to Kill when it first dropped?
They said 5,000. I don't think they printed 5,000 because I bought 1,000.
Yeah,
5,000, and I had this great idea. I would throw a big book party in my hometown. There was not a good bookstore in my hometown, just outside of Memphis, a suburb of Memphis. We had a nice library, and I went to the librarian. I said, okay, look, I've got this book coming out, and all my friends are going to buy it, and so I'm going to buy 1,000 copies. And I'll sell them. And I'm thinking, okay, I'll make some money on the retail, make some money on the royalties. I was a real smart guy, had it all figured out. And so we actually have photographs of my kids who were 6 and 3 climbing on 1,000 copies of The Time to Kill at the library. We had them all stacked up, books everywhere. And 1,000's a lot of books. And but again, I was concerned would that be enough for the book signing. And so we had this huge party. It was advertised, and a lot of folks showed up, and a lot of friends. And but when the book party was over, I still owned 882 copies of A Time to Kill. and I had this invoice coming due, and so I had to start. I realized quickly that selling books is much harder than writing books, and I've never forgotten that lesson. So long-winded answer. I think there were 5,000 hardback copies, and initially it didn't sell anywhere outside of Memphis and Jackson, Mississippi, and never went back for a second printing. Initially, no paperbacks, no foreign stuff. It was pretty much of a flop until the later books came out.
And so your initial publisher was called Winston Press, I believe. How did you get connected with them? Because the book was written in the mid 80s, or at least was kind of starting there, and it took a long time to get there. I'm not familiar with that press. How did you end up with them, for that small?
They had been gone for years. It was a brand new, like a startup printing company, publishing company, owned by a larger magazine publishing company called Fleming Revell, which I think started off as a religious publisher. And they established Winwood in New York to get into mainstream fiction and nonfiction. And their first list was like 9 or 10 books. And I was a second novel. Time to Kill was the second novel they published. We went to Winwood because everybody else said no. The first year or so, I had tried to submit myself to publishers and agents. This is long before the internet. And this was the classic submission rejection game that writers had to go through. Everybody had to go through it. Everybody got rejected, and it was no big deal. I was never suicidal because I was treating this like a little secret hobby. And so after about 15 publishers had said no to Time to Kill, about that many agents had said no, one day I got a phone call from a well-known literary agent in New York, and he said, "I want to represent you in this book." And that was the first, big phone call I ever got. Well, I said, sure. I sent him the rest of the manuscript. He only had the first 3 chapters, and he then circulated the book again. The same people who had said no to me said no to him, and so it made the rounds. And almost as a last-ditch effort, he sent it to a guy named Bill Thompson, who had worked at Doubleday for years, and he had discovered Stephen King in the mid 1970s. And Bill Thompson was a wonderful editor, a wonderful reader, had a real eye. And he said, he ran Winwood, and he said, okay, I'll buy it. And so that's how I got Winwood Press. And I'd never heard of them either. Nobody had. And so they published the book a year later. And again, they had no money for promotion. They had no money for anything really. And the book did nothing initially.
Yeah. I want to say just quick commercial here. If you don't have a copy of A Time for Mercy, you definitely need 1 or 2 or 3. It's a wonderful gift. It's cold and rainy here, so it's feeling like the holidays already. So we do have a limited number of signed copies. We have links here in the chat. Also, if you have questions for John, post those in the Q&A, and I'll try to incorporate those as we go. It's interesting. The book was not a huge success right off the bat. But then, like you mentioned, when The Firm comes out, everything changes in a way. I wonder if you think about, because the book in some ways, especially in your first, say, 15 years, 10 years of writing, it kind of stands apart in some ways from some of the other books in the sense of it's a very much a morality tale, and it's got thrilling passages, but it's certainly not a thriller. It's got those, it's somewhat different. And I wonder if the book had been as successful right off the bat as The Firm had been, for example, do you think you would have gone in any different path in terms of kind of the kinds of books you would have pursued? I don't know.
Probably my goal, if I could say I had a goal back then, because I had no idea what I was doing. And I had nobody to coach me, nobody to tell me what to do. Again, this is so true with a young writer. You're trying to get published and you don't know the ropes. You don't know where do you go for advice. There's no place to go really. And I was going to write a Ford County novel, Time to Kill. That didn't work. So my next book was going to be something much more commercial. That was my plan. And more accessible to a bigger audience. That was the goal. And then I would go back to Ford County for another story, and then back to the legal thriller. And that was what I was thinking about doing. And the success of the firm overnight just changed everything because it was, a very popular book from the beginning. And I thought, I'd better stay with the legal thrillers for a while because something is working here. And I got in the routine of doing a legal thriller, every year, and they became more and more successful. Then the first wave of the movies hit in the mid 1990s. Those first big films were, had a huge impact on my career because they were big movies with big budgets and big casts and big directors and big box office grosses, and they were selling a ton of books. And it was just like a feeding frenzy from 1992 to 1997, the first, really 5 years. And I forgot about Ford County. I said, I'm having too much fun with the legal thrillers. And there seems to be such an appetite and demand for suspense novels about lawyers. And so I put Ford County on the back burner for a long time. And because I had too many legal thrillers to write. And I don't know if I would have changed. I never really deliberately said, okay, I'm going to write differently from A Time to Kill to The Firm. I've heard that my entire career. I've heard people say, why don't you write like you did with A Time to Kill? What changed? Well, there was nothing deliberate. And to be honest, once you start appealing to a big audience, you want to stick with whatever, got you there. And I have found it impossible to go back and look at A Time to Kill and The Firm side by side and tell you what's different. I just can't, because I can't go back and read my stuff. By the time I finish a book, I am really finished with it. I mean, I've just lived it for, a long time and done 5 different drafts, and I'm sick of it. So I've just never gone back.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned that people have mentioned that your whole career, but there have been so many books where there has been kind of that more return to kind of a domestic kind of just look at kind of the human nature. A book like The Painted House, for example, I think took on a thing where I remember when that book came out, for example, and it was even a juxtaposition right then because it was kind of coming on the heels of that run, and people were like, what's this thing? What's John Grisham doing here with this? But you've kind of gotten us now, I think, back to this balance now where you have been able to create much more of a, even kind of an up and down ebb and flow to kind of the style of books you write. You don't seem to be kind of trapped into one thing. You can kind of do what you want now.
Yes, true. I can do what I want, but at the same time, there are a lot of fans out there who want the legal thriller every fall, or 2 a year. But I have been able to, after about, I don't know, first 12 or so books, it's probably human nature to ask myself, can I write something else? What else is there that I want to try? And that's where A Painted House came from. It was a fictionalized childhood memoir where I wanted to collect all these stories from my family's history while my parents were still alive, and I could use them as resources. And that's what happened. And I love that book. There are no lawyers in it. It's a different time period, different setting, and I was able to collect all these great old stories and put them together. And then at some point, I love sports, and I had the idea for Bleachers. I wrote my first sports book, and I mean I'll keep doing that. And I've done it now for almost 20 years. Go back and forth, or as we call them around the house, I'll say I'll tell my wife I'm working on a small book. The small books I write in the fall. Those are the kids' books, the Theodore Boone series, or the sports books, or the Camino books now are different types of books. But I'm still not ready to get rid of the legal thrillers. There are too many good issues to explore. There are too many good stories to tell.
Yeah, I was just looking and I realized that this is the 25th anniversary of my favorite book of yours, which is The Rainmaker, which was just one of, I love that book and I've read it several times. But it's just so funny how the time goes by so quickly.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk, you mentioned that, for example, Painted House is a childhood memoir that's been fictionalized. It's very obvious, and it's been written about a bunch, that Jake Brigance is very much an avatar for you and where you were in that time. And people view that character as, in some ways, the most autobiographical character that you have put out into the world in a lot of ways. I wonder, kind of following up on the question of what path you could have gone down, there is a world where we might have 10 Jake Brigance novels in 2020, where that could have become a character where we would be revisiting him over and over again over the years. Was that ever a possibility? And, what was it that kind of took 30 odd years to kind of revisit this character?
It's not a possibility for one big reason. Jake works in a small town in Mississippi, and in the routine practice of law, he's not going to have a big murder case every other year. I mean, those cases just don't come along, and that's one reason I waited a long time to bring him back in Sycamore Road, which is 2013. It took a while to get the case, and that's a civil case. That's not a criminal case. It's a will contest. But when he came back in 2013, I realized how popular Jake was. I think I just kind of gone to sleep or not thinking about Jake because I was writing so many legal thrillers with a lot of success and a lot of demand for those. And I realized Jake has a lot of fans, and I think it's because the book was popular, the movie was huge, and Matthew McConaughey became famous as Jake. He did a great job with the movie, and it launched his career. And because of Matthew and because of the movie, Jake is a pretty popular character, and that was proven with the with response to Sycamore Road. And so after we realized, after we kind of looked at the numbers over a couple of years, and I thought, I'm not going to wait 24 years before I bring Jake back again. So I started thinking about a story, another courtroom, a criminal case, another courtroom drama involving Jake, preferably with a case that is unpopular locally, and he has to deal with that. And so about 3 years ago, I heard a lawyer discussing one of his most difficult cases. This is a noted criminal defense lawyer, and he told the story of representing a 16-year-old kid who had pulled the trigger, and the kid was abused and horribly traumatized, and he got a gun and he pulled the trigger and he killed a man, and that even further traumatized him, and how difficult it was to get this kid to open up and to believe that the lawyer was there to actually help him, because no one had ever helped him. It was a tragic story, but I remembered it. It was vivid. I don't know what happened to the case. I didn't follow up, but I thought, that would be a great setting for Jake to have a kid like this who's committed murder, and to be sort of forced to step in and defend the kid. Jake didn't want to. He doesn't want to in the beginning of the book because he knows how unpopular this case is going to be. So it took a while to get this story, and it will take a while to get the next one. Ideally, I would like to do another Jake story in 5 years, but I don't have a clue of what the story might be right now. I just don't know. I don't see one, but something will happen. I can't just create a story. I can't just say, okay, I want Jake in a courtroom, in 2 years. That's not going to happen unless I see the story.
The book is set in 1990. I never, I guess, really, it didn't even kind of dawn on me that the original book was set in the mid 80s, or around then. It was kind of a somewhat generalized timeline, but I wonder a couple of questions about the timing of the book and why to set the book in 1990. Was there ever a thought to kind of have Jake do some kind of time jump and be like a much older character and kind of see where he is much later in his career?
Sure. Sure. That's a real possibility.
Yeah.
We started together, we were the same age because
Yeah.
the book is autobiographical. The Carly Haley trial takes place in 1985. The Sycamore Row will contest trial is 2 years later, 87. And now A Time for Mercy is 1990. And so I slowed down Jake's aging process, where mine has not slowed down, but Jake is, I can control Jake's. I picked 1990 for a couple of reasons. First of all, big reason, in 1990, it was not uncommon in the death states, including your state, Oklahoma, my state, Mississippi, and where I live now in Virginia, your active death states. It was not unusual to put a teenager on trial for capital murder. It was not unusual to sentence a teenage murderer to life without parole. Since then, about 10 years ago, the US Supreme Court stopped both of those practices. You can no longer put a teenager on trial for capital murder. You can no longer sentence a teenager to life in prison without parole. So the law's been changed. I wanted to take advantage of the way the law was 1990, which was the last year I practiced law. So I was still actively involved in criminal defense in 1990. That was about to change dramatically for me. I didn't know it at the time. And also I wanted to write the book in the pre-digital age, before the internet, before everybody has a computer in their pocket, before all the devices and technology we have now. It seemed like such a simpler time back in 1990. There were a couple of times when I was writing the book, when I had Jake sending emails. And both times I laughed. I said, wait a minute, not in 1990. We didn't have email in 1990. So I kept catching myself. Or Jake would grab for his cell phone. Well, we didn't have cell phones in 1990. We had car phones, and we were beginning to see the first pocket phones, but not cell phones. So anyway, the technology was a lot simpler back then.
Yeah, the only people that had cell phones back then was like Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, which was like the size of a shoe, on a beach or something.
Yeah.
It's funny, you actually tapped into the second part of that, which was looking at the technological aspects of that. Is it more fun to write a book where the challenges of communication are much harder? Does it make it too easy when you have cell phones? I was watching the movie. It's funny you bring that up. I was watching that great film Spotlight last night. And I love newspaper movies. I just love when people have to kind of go into the archives and find stuff out and, have meetings in clandestine places. And, it's not like they can just Google the answer, because that is set in like 2000, where there still was not the same world we're living in now. Yeah. And it does seem to me that it creates more tension having less resources. Is that kind of the basis of what you were trying to get at, like you were saying?
No, I wasn't thinking about that. I don't spend time with technology. I just don't have the patience to spend much time with devices. I left the practice of law in 1990. And when I did that, I stepped out of an active office situation where I had to be up with the latest, technology to survive. Nowadays, lawsuits are filed online. We used to have to go down to the courthouse and file them with the clerk and get them stamped, and then take them out and serve them on the, so everything's changed. But by kind of withdrawing to my cave in 1990 and doing nothing but writing, I've missed all of the technology. I missed all the stuff I would otherwise have to keep up with. And that's been kind of nice. I get very frustrated with it when I can't do things I should be able to do. And my kids and my wife really get frustrated with me. And my publisher gets frustrated with me at times because I'm so far behind and I don't want to catch up. I don't want to be ruled by gadgets, and I don't do social media. I don't tweet. I don't look at that stuff. I just don't want to be bothered with it. I've got enough stuff to keep me occupied elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, no, I was not thinking about some type of commentary about technology. I like the old stories better. I like the setting in 1990, 1985. I set a book in Ford County called The Last Juror. It went back to 1972. It was a newspaper story. 1972 wasn't a legal thriller. It was about a case, though. And then 3 years ago, I wrote a book called The Reckoning that goes back to World War II in Ford County. And so I enjoy, that was the only book I've written that took place before I was born. So I had to really dig in the research to find out what life was like on a daily basis in 1945, because I had no idea. So anyway, when I set a book in contemporary times, I am often wrong when it comes to technology. I have to get someone to help me, work through it and get it right, and I still get it wrong.
Yeah. Let's jump to a few audience questions. So we have one of our viewers, Catherine, who says, do you work on just one book at a time, or do you work on a couple of books at a time?
One book at a time is enough for me. I'm often thinking of other stories, taking notes, saving research for a potential story or issue out there that I have an interest in. But when I start writing a legal thriller, just like this year, I started A Time for Mercy on January the 1st. That's my goal every year. And I've got the book planned. I think I know how long it's going to be. I have a goal. And I have learned that January, February, and March are the best months to write because there's not a whole lot going on. The weather's bad. It's easy to withdraw in my little dark, warm office at 7 o'clock every morning with the same cup and same coffee and just spend 4 or 5 hours there. And I treasure that time. I did it this morning. So but that's how I work. I work 5 days a week, sometimes 6, several hours a day. And that's just my routine. I give myself 6 months to finish by July the 1st. And I'm always on time, often a week early, maybe a day or two late. I turn in on time. They print the books, and normally by Labor Day I'm bored and writing something else. That's kind of my schedule, and it still is a lot of fun creating stories and writing these books.
We have a question from one of our viewers, Margaret, and this kind of touches on the Innocent Man Project and some of the things you've been doing. It says, do you do any work in criminal justice reform? I think we know some of that work, but can you speak to that? And maybe there's a follow-up question that kind of fits in with that too, which is, what do you think about the attorneys for Tommy Ward asking the judge to vacate his conviction because of newly discovered evidence? It's a little bit of a deep dive, but for those of you who have not followed the Innocence Project and the book, I would encourage you to do so. But do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I work with criminal justice reform in that I'm on the board of the Innocence Project in New York and have been for a long time, since I wrote The Innocent Man, which is the only nonfiction book I've written that's set in Oklahoma. And the Innocence Project in New York, we not only labor every day to free innocent people, we also push a lot of policy on state governments. We have model laws we'd love to see enacted everywhere that would prevent almost all wrongful convictions. And so we are actively pushing reform through the Innocence Project. As far as Tommy Ward, Tommy and I have been pen pals for 15 years. He is an innocent man. He has been in prison for 35 years. His sidekick, co-defendant Carl Fontenot, got out almost a year ago when a federal judge in Oklahoma wrote an opinion that went on for 190 pages. And he said, this man is innocent. He reviewed the whole case, and it's the same crime, same two wrongful convictions, the same alleged crime. And so Carl has been out, thank God, and he's somewhere around Tulsa. He's hanging out there. I talk to him all the time. He's doing great. Tommy is not doing great. He's still locked away in Hominy, Oklahoma, and we correspond, and we are actively litigating to get Tommy out. Their cases were on different tracks, different courts, as so often happens in the appellate process, and so because Carl got out doesn't mean Tommy's going to get out. It's It's really confusing and it's very frustrating. And we thought Tommy would be out by now. But it's the problem with wrongful convictions plague all 50 states. But in Oklahoma, there've been a lot of them. There were 6 wrongful convictions in a span of 5 years in the town of Ada, Oklahoma. And almost all of them have now been cleared by DNA or released. Tommy's the last one, so we're trying to get him out.
Just to kind of follow up on that, if that story, obviously it's changed a lot since you wrote the book and there have been a lot of developments and obviously that's going to continue. Would you ever see yourself kind of writing a follow-up to an innocent man and kind of finishing that loop if there was ever a kind of an ending like that presented to it?
Possibly. The problem with nonfiction is that it just takes so much research. And I'm not really known for my research. I don't like to do it. I like to do, like when I went to Oklahoma, I went to, where's Death Row? What town is that? Not Lawson. McAllister. I went to McAllister 2 occasions, went to Death Row, talked to inmates there. That kind of research is fascinating. It's also depressing. But I had to plow through 10,000 prison documents for Ron Williamson, just to go through all of that, boxes and boxes of documents that pile up with anybody's case. And you got to get it right. You can't make a mistake when you're writing nonfiction. And so I was very careful not to make mistakes. But the process of piecing together a big case like that, I just don't have the stomach for it again. It took me 18 months to research The Innocent Man, which is not a long time as far as these books go. I was writing the whole time, and I just got in way over my head and found myself spending a lot of long hours doing, and I had a full-time research assistant that I paid to get through it. I'm just not sure I'm up to that work again. I'd rather write novels and publish legal thrillers every year. It's more fun.
Yeah. Jane asks, you mentioned your kind of yearly schedule for writing, and she says, where does the editing process come in? Is that something that happens after that first draft? Is that something that's happening kind of while the process is going?
Great question. It happens daily with me because when I start every morning, I go back and read what I wrote the day before and edit and look for words to cut because all writers use too many words. We have no restrictions on space or time or pages. And I read a lot of it out loud. The dialogue I read out loud. I want the dialogue to sound authentic. And reading that section from the day before is the best editing I do. And also it gets me back into the rhythm of the story so I can go right. As I've come to the close of a book, my wife starts reading. She's not really an editor, but she makes a lot of notes. She has a real keen eye for characters and maybe subplots that are not needed, or maybe subplots that are needed, or a subplot that's not working. So she is free with her comments. I then take her comments and do another draft, and I send that to my agent, a guy named David Gernert in New York. And David Gernert was a Doubleday in 1990 when he bought the firm. And so we have been together since 1990. He was my editor for the first 5 or 6 books. And then he became my agent, and he still does all the editing. And then David goes through the entire manuscript and does a line edit. He just, he makes 1,000 observations, corrections, suggestions. And we talk about, is there a problem? And, should this be cut? And if there's a problem, I cut it. I love to cut them. And so then I get David's notes back. That takes about 2 weeks. And then do another clean draft, and we submit that to Doubleday and to my British publisher, a guy I've had over there for 30 years. And I get a lot of good feedback there. So it's a process that goes on and on and on. And then once Doubleday gets it, they turn it over to the copy editor. And these people drive you crazy because they find mistakes that you can't believe you made. If the guys 6'4" in chapter 2. Why is he 5'10" in chapter 32? Stuff like that. You should catch, but you can't catch everything. But that's a good copy editor. Finds those mistakes. That's a process, and so the editing goes on for like 6 weeks after you break out the champagne and smoke a cigar because you finished another book. You got 6 weeks of editing.
Yeah.
But I take the editing very serious because it's where the book gets fixed. It's where the book gets better because you have really smart people reading it, and I listen to them. I always listen to them.
That makes me so, I never even have thought about this or realized it, but obviously, when you have a UK edition of a book, it often has a different cover, for example. But I do wonder, maybe I've never even thought about this. Is there substantive differences in the text sometimes between the two? Meaning, if I read both versions, would I notice anything? Or is it basically sometimes just lingo, dialogues, some slang might be changed? Like what are the changes in a couple of things?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't read them. I can't put them side by side and go back and read them. I just cannot do that. There have been a couple times when my British editor would ask me about some slang. Mm-hmm. We had one famous episode. I published a book called The Litigators, 10 years ago. Really a funny story about some ambulance chasers, just some low rent ambulance chasers in Chicago. It was a very funny book, and I really enjoyed these characters because they got into a lot of trouble. And that was my title, The Ambulance Chasers. And I love it. I still love the title. Still may use it, okay? And so, but my British publisher said, wait a minute, that means nothing over here. We don't know what that means. And I thought, well, can't you figure it out? I mean, it's pretty obvious what it is. That's a beloved term in America. We say that all the time, especially lawyers, especially denigrating a lawyer. He's just an ambulance chaser. He's not any good. So I've heard that my whole life. And this went back and forth for, several weeks. And I didn't want to yield on it. And, we finally came around. I said, okay. We do very well in the UK. I thought, I'm not going to sabotage my book here because of a title. So we went with The Litigators, which was okay, but not nearly as good. There was another title I wanted to use one time, and they had a problem with it. We worked through it. Usually there's no real substantive changes, but the British editor, again, he's been a friend for 30 years, reads the book overnight. When he gets it, he goes home. He just leaves the office and goes home and just gets in a room and reads the whole thing right then. And before I know it, I'll get a 2-page email back from him with suggestions, observations. So he's really, really good. So I listen to him. I listen to my editors.
Yeah. We have a viewer, Martha, who's asked a question about sports and what you like. We obviously know you're a huge baseball fan. And last time we spoke, it was in April, and we were kind of lamenting the loss of baseball because the season had not happened. And obviously it did, and we're in the middle of the World Series right now. What's it been like having baseball back in some way, shape, or form?
Well, it's good. It's one small step back toward normalcy. I was watching a pro football game Sunday, and I don't spend my Sunday afternoons, in front of television. I'll spend Saturday in front of. I love college football. I watched a bunch of games last weekend, but my wife walked through the den and she said, "Why are you watching pro football?" She doesn't care. She doesn't like football. And I said, it just feels like it's almost normal to see a good football game. I didn't care who was winning or who was losing, but it was comforting. And same with baseball. It's good to see the game being played. I'm really worried about college basketball because we're huge college basketball fans. We live here in Charlottesville, and we go to all the UVA home games. Our son went to UVA, and we don't miss those games. My wife is a Tar Heel fan. She went to UNC. My daughter went to UNC. That's 3 hours away from here. We go to almost all of the home UNC games in Chapel Hill. So, that's a big part of our winter and spring is, basketball. we've been to the Final Four. We really love it. But now we're talking about a season that's probably going to be played indoors, obviously indoors, with no fans, because we just can't. I mean, I don't want to go to a game indoors. My wife and I have not been to a restaurant indoors since March, not going for a while anyway. So, yeah, it's made a difference for all of us. These are the small problems compared to what most people are facing. The sports books are a lot of fun to write and research. I wrote a book called Playing for Pizza. Once I discovered American football being played in Italy, and it's really there. It's a true story. And so I went back and back and back, and my guide became my buddy. He was a former Italian football player, also an Italian chef. And he took me to all the great restaurants in Bologna and Parma, Italy. I gained 15 pounds in like 2 months just eating food in Italy. And I put all that stuff in the book. And, I've had people say they got hungry reading Playing for Pizza because of all the food. But I do love sports. I've had 2 football books, 1 baseball book, thinking about a basketball book. So that's my diversion.
We've had a few people bring up Playing for Pizza. One of our commenters, Kathy, said Playing for Pizza was my favorite of the books that veered away from the legal world. So yeah, there's a lot of love for Playing for Pizza. I wonder, when you think about the COVID-19 era, I'm sure at some point we're going to start seeing books set in this period and writing about this world. When do you think it's okay to kind of write about current events, because it's changing so quickly? Do you need some space and time to kind of have some distance for really getting a handle on it?
Yeah, we're about to see an avalanche of pandemic, plague, contagion novels, books. I mean, they're coming. They are. I was doing an interview with a BBC show the other day in the UK, and they were talking about how the publishers over there, I had not heard this, but the publishers have been inundated with just a whole new pile of manuscripts because people are stuck at home and they're writing books. And so, it's coming. I'm sure there will be a lot of plague stories and scary stories. And when do you write about? I don't know. Good question, because when Katrina hit in 2005, it hit the Gulf Coast hard. New Orleans very hard, but also the Gulf Coast of Mississippi was devastated. And I had friends who were lawyers down there, and they just barely got out with the shirts on their backs and lost everything, lost their homes, offices. A lot of it was uninsured, and I had an idea for a novel that I thought was based on a friend of mine who was a lawyer, had a fine home that was washed away, and he was living in his front yard in a FEMA trailer with a pup tent beside it and a little small generator, and barely getting by for a few weeks, and just stunned at the loss of everything. And I went to see him, and it was heartbreaking. And I thought, there could be a real story there. There could be I could make this a novel. And then I thought, I'm going to wait, because I don't want to capitalize on so much suffering and so much misery. I would feel opportunistic if I did that. And so I didn't do it. Years passed and I kind of forgot about it. I don't think it's a problem to write about the pandemic now. It's so much a part of our lives, all of us. It's historic. We'll never do this. Well, we've never done it before. We hope we never do it again. But this is truly something that will be written about in the history books for decades. And so I don't think there's a problem with writing about it. I have no plans to. I'm watching it closely because of the legal issues that are coming out of it. They're going to be fascinating.
Yeah. You've been so great to independent bookstores, of course, like us, and so many that you've supported. You've kind of been, I would say there's 2 or 3 that kind of have been associated with you. One is, of course, the famous Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi. One is a bookstore in Blytheville, Arkansas, called That Bookstore in Blytheville. I wonder, have you been kind of keeping up with those kind of stores, and obviously the stores where you live now, the stores in your orbit, and kind of just taking their temperature and kind of seeing how they're doing, and kind of, making sure, that they're doing okay?
I have, we've done events virtually with all of them in the past, since publication. I did virtual events with all of them back in the spring, except for the store in Blytheville, which I think has finally closed. The owner sold out a few years ago. She retired, sold out. And Blytheville, Arkansas is small town America, small farming town, and it's not nearly as big as it used to be. And it's a tough place to sell books. And there's not much of a market. And so I think that bookstore may have closed. But the other four, Square Books in Oxford, Lemuria in Jackson, Burke's in Memphis, and Reed's in Tupelo, those were and Blytheville. Those are the 5 stores that, with the time to kill, they welcomed me in the stores. Whereas a lot of stores, you don't have time for a first-time unknown author. And they really got behind me early on. And back then in 1989, 1990, your independent bookstores and the circuit, the tours, were crucial for debut authors, because you guys read, you guys know books and publishers, you guys have relationships with editors, and you guys want authors in your store, and you have a fan base, and you can draw a crowd. And that's crucial for, back then it especially was crucial for first-time writers to have the indies behind you. And because of the support back then, it really helped me get started. I've always found it easy to say thanks and go back and have fun with old friends.
Yeah. Last time we spoke, we talked about what you'd been reading, and I wonder if there were a couple of things over the summer that you really enjoyed, that you either kind of stumbled on, or something you went back to as kind of a comfort read during the pandemic.
My pandemic literary project was to read all 6 novels by Walker Percy. And I'm in number 5 right now. I'm taking it slow. He is slow. He's a great writer, but you can't get in a hurry with Walker Percy. One guy I really am just having a ball with is a writer named Ben McIntyre. He's a British guy, and he writes these incredible, accessible, readable stories about World War II and spies in Russia. And he wrote a book about 4 or 5 years ago called Rogue Heroes, about these wacky, goofball British soldiers who became like the first Navy SEAL unit. Didn't call them that, obviously, but they were crazy soldiers who did all kinds of, his books they read like thrillers. And he's got he's got a new one out now called Agent Sonia. I've just bought that one. But I'm going through Ben McIntyre's books and having far too much fun as a reader.
Do you read much nonfiction? You mentioned obviously you've written one book of nonfiction. Do you find yourself kind of going back and forth between fiction and nonfiction?
Yeah, it's about 50-50. I read a lot of nonfiction because that's what I write about. Legal issues, stuff I wouldn't necessarily recommend for fun reading, but more works by scholars to talk about the problems we have and how to fix them. A lot of good stuff out there, but I need to read that stuff to kind of stay abreast of what I'm writing. But I love fiction. I love crime. I love the police procedural. I love mysteries. I grew up reading that stuff. I grew up reading Louis L'Amour and Agatha Christie and John D. McDonald, and all those great crime writers that I still read.
Yeah. So we've had a ton of questions, and we actually did an event last night with Matthew McConaughey for his new book. And we ended that conversation. Of course, the question came up whether he had read A Time for Mercy, which he has. And he talked about how strange it was reading it because he's so connected to that character, and how he even sees himself in the role, like when he pictures it in his mind's eye, it's like he's watching himself, and some of these strange things. And of course, when people read this book who have been influenced by that film, they do probably see Jake as Matthew McConaughey a lot of the time in their mind's eye. We did talk about the potential for a film. Obviously, there could be a Sycamore film, there could be a couple of films, but he did say he would be open to doing that. Is that something that's been broached with you at all?
I'm sure at some level. I mean, I have not. Let's be honest. If Matthew wants to do um, the movie will get made. If you've got, his starring role and, on my book, I'm sure it's a sequel to A Time to Kill. It's kind of up to him. If he doesn't want to do it, I'm sure it'll take longer to work a deal. But the book has been out now for a couple of weeks, and there were a bunch of advanced reading copies that people circulate in Hollywood. And my agent gets calls every day from somebody about one of the books, film rights or whatever. And we don't always talk about all those because it's a lot of them. And the conversations tend to go nowhere, to be honest, nowadays. But if there's a strong effort by somebody to adapt A Time for Mercy, yeah, I'm on board, and I'd love for Matthew to do it.
Yeah, it's funny, we still get lots of questions about movies, which means we haven't quite caught up to how the world works now. Everything's TV. You would almost think that this would be more of a limited series, which in some ways is better for the writer because you can get the book in there more and you get more space to breathe. Whereas in a book, as I'm sure anybody who's read even the films or the books based on or the films based on your books, there's changes. There has to be. Things get cut. Things you lose characters. You lose certain storylines. Do you ever get excited about the idea of kind of having a larger canvas to kind of tell your stories on if they get played out in a more episodic space?
Sure. We have probably 5 or 6 TV deals right now in some stage of production. We've had a bunch of them over the years and nothing has happened. We have 2 or 3 movie deals right now, but nothing is being filmed. I have not had a feature film made in 15 years. So the business has really changed. It's gravitated to television, as you say. That's where the money is, the talent is, and the fun is. Because I'm not sure what the future of movies is going to be because the movie theaters are going bankrupt, every day, and it's going to change the business tremendously. And for the next few years, people are going to be more content to stay at home, I think, and just watch and binge like we all love to binge on, a great show. And I think that's going to be the future, near term anyway.
Yeah. I'd like to end with a couple of questions. We're a week away from the election. And one of the things that I've been so fascinated with your career is when you look at, if you probably have a sense of who your audience is, I would say you've done a really interesting job of probably having a really wide audience in terms of the demographics, in terms of even the gender split. It seems like your fan base crosses a lot of different interest, political spectrum, all that stuff. Have you ever written anything that you felt kind of gave away in a real overt way any certain views of yours politically where you actually got any pushback? Because I think it's fairly obvious when you read your work and you talk about the work you do in criminal justice reform that you have very strong views on certain issues. But have you ever had any kind of pushback from a partisan standpoint through any of the work you've done?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I've been criticized by some things I've seen for intrusive politics in the books. And I don't really, you can't assume the reader shares your politics. And I don't do that. But when you read one of my books about capital punishment, you kind of know where I come down. And when you read a book about wrongful convictions, you can feel the frustration that we still have these cases and that we can't get innocent people out of prison. I wrote a book a few years ago called The Rooster Bar that took on for-profit law schools and painted a really ugly picture of them. And I'm sure they didn't like that. But at the same time, I'm not I don't really expose myself to a lot of criticism. If there's a bad review, I'm not going to see it. I'll avoid it. If somebody's railing against me online, I'm not going to see it. I don't really care. I don't have time to sit around and worry about how people might react to my politics.
Yeah. Well, and finally, when we last spoke in April, the pandemic was underway, lockdowns were happening. One thing that had not happened yet was kind of the George Floyd moment and kind of what's happened this summer with all of the kind of social unrest and also the activism happening around the Black Lives Matter movement. When you look at a book like A Time to Kill, for example, obviously you're tackling issues of race head on. I wonder if you notice or see anything in terms of a growing interest in some certain, like a book like A Time to Kill, when issues of race and things like that become more and more in the news. Do you see certain books like that being talked about more, kind of some kind of a reappraisal of the books in any way?
I'm not sure about the books, but this moment sure feels different. It seems as though we have reached a point that we cannot walk away from again, with the shootings and the videos and all that, with the leadership of professional athletes who have enormous power in this country, with some of the politicians. I think we're at a point now where we've got to make start making changes. If we could start making changes in our criminal justice system by changing laws that severely impact minorities, mass incarceration, sentencing disparities, problems that we could clean up if we had the willpower. I think we're at that moment. A lot of it depends on what happens on election day, because one side wants meaningful criminal justice reform, the other one does not. And that will have a huge impact. The Supreme Court could be another huge factor in the years to come. So we have a long way to go, but I think we're at a moment now where we can't turn around and ignore this. We've got to face. We always have to face race, but police misconduct and the unfairness of so many of our laws and the unfairness of the system. It's time to start making changes.
Yeah,
I got to run, Jeff.
I appreciate your time. Thank you all for watching. This has been a great time, and hope to see you in person next time. Thank you, John.
Always a pleasure. I'll see you next time. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye-bye.